I'd like to introduce you to Shawn Bryant. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Leah. And good morning to those in California and good afternoon to those in other places, because I do recognize that not everyone on this virtual session is in the same time zone. So thank you all for joining. It's actually been a while. So I feel like Catherine and Leah, it's I forget how long, but at one point I felt like I was showing up here at least once a month, sometimes twice a month. And then, it feels like it's been years, but I know it has not been years. But I'm happy and I feel honored that you all welcomed me back to First Five Alameda's training and created the training series on child development. So we're going to start with today with social and emotional development in the early years. I'm going to share my screen. And then we'll move to, this was originally the second one in the series, but some family stuff prevented me from starting with brain development. So brain development will be next week. And then the third one, which is developmental appropriateness of challenging behaviors, is kind of part two. If you weren't at a part of part one, if you go to First Five Alameda's YouTube page, the recording of the first session that I think we did over a year ago in the summer is located on their YouTube page for you to watch and see how we're going to build on that for session two. So I see some familiar names in the chat. Welcome and thank you all. Leah keeps putting the link to the materials in the chat box, so you can go there to access the link to the materials and to register for some of those sessions that Catherine mentioned. There's one on supporting child and family resiliency in immigrant households, and of course, the second and third sessions of this child development series. All right, so we'll jump right in to the session as people continue to enter. So for those who don't know, I'm Shawn Bryant. I'm going to be your facilitator on this learning journey. I hold a couple of roles. Yeah, I'm the director of YesToECE, formerly the Teaching Excellence Center. It's my consultancy where I train, coach, and consult on a national level. My second kind of role is I'm the director of professional development and adult learning at Yale University's Child Lab. So largely what I do is I train mental health consultants and coaches and researchers and evaluators. So think of people who come into your early learning setting and they may be an ECMH, they may be a coach, they may be a QRS person. Largely, those are the people across the country that we train on the tool we created years ago that was a response to the suspension and expulsion of preschool age children. So I have some fun doing that, and I'm actually going to share one thing I created this summer with you all regarding climate. The big part of what we do at the heart of it is social emotional learning. And then we talk about this notion of how do we affect climate as adults when we share space with young children. And my third large role is I'm the pedagogical lead for Philly Pre-K at Heaven's Angels here in Philadelphia, where I am right now. I'm actually not in the Bay Area, I'm actually in Philadelphia. So that means, in large respect, I'm helping the school go through the quality process of being a Philadelphia pre-K provider. But then my other role is I actually have a classroom of 16 preschoolers. Yeah, my middle-aged self decided to go back into the classroom and I'm teaching again. It is wonderful, it's frustrating, it's a challenge. My back and my knees remind me some days that I made a mistake, and on other days, I'm like, I'm living what I train and coach people about. Out of those 16 children, literally 6 of them are on the autism spectrum. 2 of them have really unique health needs, 3 who experience birth and early childhood trauma, and they're all there learning and growing and challenging me each and every day to show back up, to drink a lot of coffee, put on my big boy pants, and prove to myself that all these things we talk about in early childhood are real, and that I'm actually putting them into practice. So amazingly, I don't know how I continue to do it and do all of these other things, but I'm actually having a lot of fun doing it. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. What you see on the screen here for folk who don't know me, those are my 3 godkids. Over my shoulder is Shola, whose birthday was last month. Beside me is Buhai. He just turned 12 7 days ago. And then that's Madison. She's in kindergarten, and she will have a birthday December 22nd. So all of their birthdays are literally a month apart, right before Christmas. I said to Tiffany and John, why did y'all do this? Like, they're making it hard on their godfather. So just a little bit about me. I'm not going to read to you what's on the screen, but this is really the things that I find really important in my 31 plus years of being in early childhood family studies. Things that are important to me about culture, social cultural learning, families into practice with a spotlight on fathers. I believe that ABAR should show up in everything we're doing. It shouldn't be something we're talking about. It should be something we're doing. And that's anti-bias and anti-racist teaching and learning. Leadership at all levels, including in the classroom. If you work with, as a family childcare provider, you're a leader. If you work in play groups, like my friends over there at Lotus Bloom in Oakland, regardless of the role, I believe leadership at all levels is important. And then at the very bottom in red, something that I call it a 4-letter word because it is 4 letters, but we almost use it in some respects as if it's a naughty word, this notion of play. I believe that particularly as we think of this series, if we think of brain development, we think of challenging behaviors, and we think of social emotional learning, think of play as one of I'm used this word lightly, one of the cures to what we believe ails young children and ails those of us adults who are charged with supporting adults who care for them and educate them, or directly supporting them. But how do we learn that we have a role and responsibility in facilitating play? How do we sustain it? And then this other big thing around the troubles and unanswered questions that we have regarding play. I'm actually I usually read 3 or 4 books at one time. And there's this book I'm reading right now called The Trouble with Play. If you're into play, it is excellent. It's going to turn some things over for you if you are, a very Western mind framed thinking around, when children play, we stand off. They unearth some real things around our old thinking regarding play and specific types of play that we value and other types of play that we kind of say no to. So it's a fantastic read. I'm thinking of actually gifting some of my closest friends and colleagues the book and making them participate in the book club with me. Leah, you might be in that book club, so who knows? In short, I'll move forward. I continue to do this work in the hopes of supporting adults who care and educate young children in different settings and different places and spaces. Because what I firmly believe is that when young children and adults are afforded opportunities from the inside out, it's one of the #1 ways that we can become positive, productive citizens. And to hear me do more of that, I invite you to show up on social media, YouTube. I'm back on Facebook. Facebook and I had a real tough divorce there, but 2 really great colleagues of mine, Barbara O'Neill, who does the Transforming Challenging Behavior, and Kathy Brody, who's in the UK, who I did an interview with this year. I'm about to do another one with her, encouraged me to come back to Facebook. So about, I want to say 4 months ago, I reopened a Facebook account, and I'm working with 2 really great young people, Jonah Pratt, who is from the Bay Area, and Sully Muhammad, who is from Philadelphia. They're both in their 20s, and they're helping me to, really live this social media thing. And they're doing some real creative stuff with me that we're going to release starting in the new year. But we're recording and doing things that I never thought of. So young people can show up in ways that us middle-aged folk kind of forget about. So if you're on social media, see me on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, and those other places. I will tell you that for those of you who like Twitter, I'm on Twitter or X, but my Twitter posts are usually like my diary. It's like me living a normal life and thoughts that go through my head is usually what I post on Twitter. So if you want to get in my business that way, Twitter is where you want to follow me, because I know there's some people who are like that. But I hope you follow and join and participate, particularly what we're releasing in the new year. I realized that I couldn't do it by myself, and I've been trying to do it by myself for years, right, Leah? And I yielded and said, okay, I need some help. I need some help. So in this virtual learning process, we're going to raise awareness about social and emotional skills. They are two separate sets that we put together. I often say it should be emotional and social, because that's literally how it happens. But I think social and emotional sounds better across the tongue. Then we're going to learn some new skills about the what, the when, and the how to teach social and emotional skills. And then I'm going to offer you, which one is a reflection checklist, and the other one is just a checklist of effective social and emotional skills for you to use regardless of your role and responsibility. All right. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So as we move forward, I'm going to encourage you all to grab a pencil, some paper, with the 40 folk that are on here with me, to write down some things. I want to give you some ideas of what I want you to write down. So you don't need to write down what's on the screen, because everything on the screen is in that handouts link. Everything on the screen is what you'll get. I designed it purposely that way so that you're not trying to write down the things that come out of my mouth. Instead, with that paper, or pen, or crayon, or marker, or whatever you're writing on, I want you to engage with yourself in this short time that we're together. As you know, this information is being presented, I want you to think about what sends you into your own memories. When you hear me speaking or something pops up on the screen and you go to your own story, that's wonderful. I want you to take note of what that story is and why you believe you were thinking of that. Take note to what makes you connect throughout this short time together. When you feel like you're leaning in or nodding in agreement, but when you feel like you're saying to yourself, nope, I don't believe that, and you're doing it silently, take note of that by writing it down and writing down what was it that was on the screen or that was stated that made you say no. And then this fourth consideration I want you to think about is, how are you increasing your own social and emotional skills as an adult? How are you increasing your own social and emotional skills as an adult? So I want you all to do me a favor. People keep joining. Wonderful. I want everybody to just, I promise you in these 2 hours, I won't ask a lot of you, meaning I won't push you into a breakout room and force you to talk to people you don't know. I won't force you to cut your camera on, even though I appreciate all of those with them on. I see Dr. Janice Farron, who has her camera on. She's over there in Newark, New Jersey. Told you people were across the time zones. I want everybody to do me a favor. And this is really for me. If you can just put in the chat, you don't have to write your name, but just write your role, your responsibility, like your job title, those things, so I can get a gist of who you are in this Zoom classroom with us. So take about 30 seconds as I go over the community agreements. You can listen to me, but I want you to type in the chat your role, responsibility, what you do, how do you work with young children, how do you work with adults, so that we can get who you are. I see family navigator, inclusion navigator, site supervisor, family support specialist, center manager, mental health consultant. Okay, Christine, my old role. Site leader, community outreach worker. That sounds like an interesting job. Senior program manager, support ECE leaders. All right. Site supervisor, program director, family resource coordinator, museum program assistant. Wow, those jobs sound really interesting. Certified positive discipline parent and parenting coach. That's my good brother, Mike Lewis. Among cultural centers, program coordinator, special start community outreach. Awesome, awesome. Keep them coming, keep them coming. Thank you all. Public health nurse. All right, Savita. Training coordinator. Oh, that's Soyla. Soila, how are you, Soila? That's my friend Soila. I didn't even see her here. Look at her. Jeanette, all right. Director of Student Operations. Awesome, awesome. Site supervisor. There we go. There we go. All right. Just keep it coming. I just wanted to know who was in this space with this. So for these community agreements, and I'm going to speed it up. This isn't just going to be me speaking. I want us to engage. That means use the chat as things come up if you feel like you want to share. And feel free to unmute. This isn't one of those situations where you can't unmute. Just be careful that you're not unmuting unnecessarily. But you can type it in the chat, but if noise is behind you or if it's not behind you, feel free to speak openly and out, all right, at any point. And if I don't see your hand raised, Leah's back there. She can help me or just start talking and I'll stop, okay? Because you all have wisdom and experience that I want you to bring to this notion of social and emotional skills, because we're taking a little bit of a deeper dive. We're not doing the kind of surface thing that is important because there's so many people who are constantly coming into this work. But I always want you to think about your role and responsibility and simultaneously who you are, who your family is, who your community is, because that plays a role in social and emotional skills. And I want you to be open to new ways of understanding social emotional learning and skill building so that you can attach that to your takeaways. And we're going to come back to your role and responsibility and your family around social emotional learning and why social emotional skills seem to be this low-hanging fruit that everyone is troubled by. So a quick overview, we're going to kind of jump into social emotional development and its importance in the early years in a kind of a different way. Hold the notion that relationships between children and adults, consistent positive relationships at the heart of strong, supportive social emotional learning and skill development. And then we're going to cover strategies, which is the bulk of this session. And I had to do some push back and forth with Leah and Catherine to explain why I didn't want to just go through social and emotional skills, but really these strategies and how do we get there to deeper, adults facilitating learning for young children or supporting other adults who care and educate young children. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you all that I am the contributing author for Trauma Responsive Family Engagement in Early Childhood, and the author of Trauma Informed Practices in Early Childhood Educators, second edition. And I share this with you because, in full disclosure, every dollar in proceed from these books, we donate them to organizations across the country. So every book that's sold, meaning I don't get one dime from the sale of these books. Trauma Responsive Family Engagement, all the proceeds kind of every quarter, a check is sent out to Parent Voices Oakland. And the second edition of Trauma Informed Practices, the proceeds go to Young Warriors, which is in New Orleans. And I believe the first edition goes to this program in Brooklyn called Butterflies. So there's a series of like 6 books now, and all the proceeds go to different agencies. And we try to write them. Well, Rutledge, Eye on Education, they want all their books to be geared towards the folk who are actually on the ground doing the work. And that's something I appreciate about them. Hey, Khadijah Brown. Khadijah's over there with the
How you doing?
I'm wonderful. Good to see you. Good to see you. She's in New Jersey. We have a few people here from New Jersey, so awesome. So we're going to jump right in to this notion of social and emotional, but this notion of competence. How do we help young children get to this place of social and emotional skills and them developing competencies, right? In the context of strong supportive relationships, in the context of them being pretty much, if we're thinking about children under the age of 5, alive for less than 2,000 days, it requires us to be intentional and explicit in our teaching, in our care, in our education, because we know that when we're intentional and explicit, that has been shown to increase young children's social and emotional competence. So we can't miss that. It's not something where we stand back and fold our arms and think that it's going to magically happen. We've got to lean in. And earlier when I talked about this notion of culture, this plays this kind of invisible force here. Because if you think about mathematics and numbers, I always see adults explicitly teaching children. If we think of literacy, there are stages to math, there are stages to literacy, and how we get there. There are actually stages to social emotional learning, also in this notion of social competence. So if we think of all domains of learning, for some reason, the social emotional domain always gets pulled out and kind of spotlighted in this negative way. So if I have no other hope for you all today on this call, is for when it gets pulled out, for you to spotlight it in a positive way with a different understanding. And what I mean by that is in this country, in the last probably 170 years, when young children were afforded a schooling experience, their parents were told, drop your children off, you're a farmer, so you're ignorant. And then we'll teach them so they won't be as ignorant as you, and then come pick them back up. And remember, schooling was originally started in this country by religious males. So that influence of who they were showed up in who was offered and not offered what? In education or schooling. That same notion still persists. Because what we've done over the last 150 years is we've sent this flip-flop to families around what we call moral development. Moral development has a direct route to social and emotional learning around how we see it. It's why we often say it comes from the home. It's his mother. So there's no father there. All of those are moral judgments about a young child's behavior that has a direct connection to what social and emotional learning. We've got to hold that in mind when we're thinking of social emotional skills, and why we're sometimes saying, oh, the kids are just different and nothing is working. We've got to realize what we're bringing to that situation that prevents them from what? Getting to this place of competency. It's the history that shows up presently, or some of us like to say, how the past and the present kind of merge together. So our hope, our goal is that as we move towards the future with that past and that present, we'll have a new understanding and do at least one thing different to prevent all the ways young children were not afforded competencies around social emotional learning to not show up in the future. So let's stop for a moment here. Let's take about 2 minutes. How do you define social emotional development? You can put it in the chat, you can unmute. Take a moment to think about it. How do you define social and emotional development? There are no right or wrong answers here. There are no right or wrong answers. Social and emotional development. How do you define it? In your own words, don't Google it. If I was talking to all of my teenagers in my life, they Googled everything for answers. Don't Google it. Oh, self-regulation, building relationships. How a person responds to a given situation. I love all of these. Support. Phyllis, all right. The development of social and emotional skills includes brain development, skill development, focuses on self, those around, regulation, dysregulation. Thank you, Jessica. Helen says, learners to be kind and respectful and being safe in a learning environment. I love that, Helen. Helen's a Montessorian like myself. That sounds very Montessori, Helen. Growth and maturation of the individual. Ability to understand and regulate oneself and build relationships with others. We're going to talk about that, Rachel. Relationship skills and understanding emotions. How you respond to situations. Authenticity and love. All right, I like that one. That means I need to stop right there. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. But I'm going to come back to. Oh, more greatness are popping up here. I'm so distracted. But a lot of what you all are saying is about your experience, what you were taught, what was modeled, which is why we said there are no wrong answers, because who we show up with who we are, even if we attempt to what? Hide it, even if we attempt to hide it. So where was she? I think it was Rachel. Rachel said the ability to understand and regulate one's self and build relationships with others. So this isn't, we're not taking the deep dive into self-regulation, but they're all connected. So Dr. Stuart Shanker, who's up in Canada at the Merit Center, he espouses that this notion of social emotional learning or skill building as the broad umbrella that everything falls under. And then so self-regulation or co-regulation has a component there as another broad scope. But what he says, so if you think about young children, is that self-regulation or social skill development, social emotional skill development, is a social act. I want you to write this down, actually, because you're gonna have to come back to it. He uses the word self-regulation. He says self-regulation is a social act between an adult and a child, or a peer, a child and a child, in some regards, for a child who's more regulated. We're talking about social emotional learning. So if it's a social act, he says that we need repeated experiences co-regulating, meaning young children, with regulated adults to develop self-regulation, i.e. social and emotional foundational skills. When we've done that thousands of times, this is how we develop the individual act. That self-control is an individual byproduct of co-regulating with a regulated adult. Now, I just said a lot. It seems simple, but it's actually quite heavy. So what Dr. Shanker is saying is we've got to stop putting social emotional development on children alone. And what we've got to unpack is the adults who are around them at home, at school, in their communities. Because if the adults are not regulated, the children can't co-regulate with them to regulate. They're going to be dysregulated like the adults, which is why he says it's a social act, that we cannot see it as an individual piece anymore. The children who are in my classroom who show up every day at 8:30 and are dysregulated. I have a little boy who for 2 months, every day his mom dropped him off. He would just scream. He didn't want you to touch him, and he would lie on the floor until he was ready. And then his scream can break glass. So I knew we have to not just meet him where he is, but do some things different around the relationship and where his social emotional skills were lacking. So that meant I had to show up ready to regulate with them every single day. Is it difficult? Of course it is. But it's part of what he needs as an individual, which is something else we're going to get to later. So co-regulation, social emotional development, self-regulation, a social act that leads to the individual act of being to manage oneself later. Not right now, but later. Hold that in mind. Hold that in mind, that every time you engage, or if you supervise adults when they engage and they forget and say, Malik should be able to do it on his own. Eddie Berto should be able to do it on his own. Irma should be able to do it by herself at 2 and 3 and 4. Well, let's think through this differently and see, how has this child been supported with a regulated adult to get there? Not right now, but over time. So because Alameda County, was in California, is sponsoring this series, I decided to use the California Preschool Learning Foundations in kind of their broad definition of defining this notion of social emotional skills. So I pulled some of what's in the foundations on the screen for you all. So in volume 1 that opens with social and emotional development, they talk about social emotional skills emerge through children's experience in close relationships. We talked about that in the overview, and the varied activities that occur in relational experiences. Remember, not 50, not hundreds, but thousands of daily interactions that create experiences and activities that we're talking about here, such as shared conversation, warm nurturance, and guided assistance in learning capacities for sociability, responsibility, and self-control. So you maybe say, okay, Shawn, I heard what you read, but look, I work over here on the East Side, and that might not apply to us. What does this really mean? If I'm in a classroom the way you're talking about, in here, the classroom that I work in, it's literally, they're largely children of color, but all of their parents have really decent jobs. So they're, I guess we would call, I don't know what working class is anymore, because I read this report and it said middle class. There was like almost $150,000 difference in how they would classify middle class, which is why I dislike labels. But according to that research, they would all be middle class or upper middle class families, meaning they have access to resources. That's usually the difference here. So these aren't a bunch of children who, are coming from households where anything goes. But essentially, this definition is saying with an adult who's fully aware of where they are, or I like to say when and where they enter and how they're showing up, children gain social and emotional skills over time by co-regulating, doing what Dr. Shanker says, each and every day that they show up to your program, each and every time you show up as a home visitor, each and every time they show up at your clinic, whatever your role and responsibility is, each and every interaction can build that when we're in close relationship with young children. Then they go on to say, the foundations of social and emotional development described here, including, and these are all what I call the low-hanging fruit. So these are all the tenets of social emotional development. If this was just a social emotional series, we would unpack them all, including the growth of self-awareness, self-regulation, cooperation and responsibility, social and emotional understanding, empathy, which is one of my favorites, and caring. Then they go on to say interactions with peers, this means other children, friendships, group participation, classroom, community space, home, synagogue, mosque, church, initiatives in learning, attachments to parents, close relationships with teachers and caregivers, and interactions with familiar adults are each predictive, here it comes, of children's adaptation to school and their academic success. This is what they keep finding out. So that last sentence, I'm actually working with a group in Oakland called Lotus Bloom, and we're exploring over a series of parent, family, and staff kind of sessions. What are the real markers of school success for children who are moving into kindergarten from preschool? In the last piece that I want to share with you all as we define social and emotional skills, here's that dirty word play. They said that play is a central context for social and emotional development in early childhood. So they said it's a central context for the development of social and emotional skills. So let's get into what this actually looks like. So if we think of healthy social emotional development compared to unhealthy social and emotional development, I pulled this right from the ELOF, the Head Start ELOF. So those Head Start folk that are on the call, this is right up your path. They talked about things like when children engage and maintain positive relationships and interactions with adults, it's a sign of them having a healthy foundation. When children engage in pro-social and cooperative behaviors with adults, another sign. When children engage in cooperative play with their peers, when they have some basic problem-solving skills to resolve conflicts with children. So one is fresh in my mind. So I was leading circle last week, and the door to the classroom was open, and our door, that we put a little block there, little piece of wood to keep it open because people put their stuff behind it and it make the door kind of move when we're coming in and out. So I had asked a few kids who I thought could do it. I said, do Mr. Shawn a favor, go to the door, push the door back and kick the wood away and close the door. So this notion of problem solving, I had asked 3 children who I thought could do it, and they all went to the door and they were all pulling the door towards them because they knew if the door goes this way, it closes. But I said, and did my hands like this, I said, push the door and kick it. So the 4th time, Zakari got up on her own and she said, I'll do it. I'll do it. Problem solving. So when she did it, I kind of smiled at the other adults in the room because I kind of knew she's going to be able to, because she's one of those children. She has an old soul. And she got to the door and Bryce didn't want to move. And he said, I'm here. And she says, I know. She said, but you can't close the door. Mr. Shawn wants us to close the door. She said, you're pulling the door. He said, push it. She resolved the conflict. Bryce stepped back. She pushed it. I saw her hands do like this, and I saw her little leg move. And then the door began to close. This is all healthy social and emotional development. That's just one example of the way it might show up, right? Then they talk about this notion of children expressing a range of emotions and recognizing emotions in themselves. So here's something that I actually learned from Lisa Feldman Barrett. I'm reading some of her books on the brain, and just some fascinating stuff. If you go to Big Think on YouTube and go to their page and type in Lisa Feldman Barrett, and just listen to her little 10-minute spiel, I guarantee you're going to learn a lot. But I'm reading her text also. So one of the things I learned about her, so if you go back to the beginning of the pandemic, Leah was there, and we did a series on kind of play and responding to stress. In the series, I think it was the 3rd one, I talk about this notion of emotions and how we need to teach emotional vocabulary to children, but adults, most of us don't have a large vocabulary of feelings and emotions words. So when they talk about expressing a range, now the original research that I read said that universally, there are 6 emotions that we all experience: happy, sad, mad, glad. We all know those that we teach young children. So I'm thinking this has been initially researched. It's always a woman who corrects an error of a bunch of men in the room. So Dr. Feldman says, they made that up. I was like, I'm giving out bad information. The last thing I ever want to do. So that made me dig deeper into what she was saying. The heart of that, and I know many of you have heard this, they're in all kinds of textbooks. It was a group of white men who were researchers who went in a room and said, these are the ones we agree on, and we're going to make them universal. That's exactly what happened. There was no research done globally that says these emotions are universal. They made it up. And it took Dr. Feldman Barrett to say, actually, some other things are going on here. Anyway, how do you show up, or how do the adults you support show up having a range of emotions? Most of us don't. As an adult, if we have to teach it, which is why socio-emotional teaching is so difficult. We're asking adults to carry this bucket that they don't have the hands to resource in many respects. So the adult has to take a step back and say, I've got to teach myself and learn some things. Then this notion of children expressing and concern and care towards others, that empathy one. And then this notion of managing our emotions and increasing independence. So this one is one of my favorites because I say anybody that knew me when I was 15 and 17, 21, I would even say 25, compared to Shawn that's in his 50s, you'll say, oh, this is a completely different person. I don't believe it, around how I had to learn how to skillfully manage my emotions, that what I was feeling was not for the world to experience. What I was feeling at work, it wasn't for my manager to always hear. What I was feeling at home wasn't for the people who lived in the house with me to have to hold, my big emotions about whatever my experience was. Then this notion of children seeing themselves as unique individuals. with their own emotions, their own interests and abilities. Now we know culturally, because we're all here in the West, that's a very Western way that you're an individual, you have your own abilities, emotions, that connects with this notion of independence, that many Western families or parents want their children to be independent. Many non-Western cultures and families put a premium on what interdependence. You are an individual, but we want you to see your resourcing as you're connected to us, and this is where some of your strength lies. And I'm not going to go any deeper with that because that would be its own session, and too much to unpack there. And then this notion of how do children show up and express their own confidence in their skills. Zakari did it when she said, I can do it. She was watching what was happening, and in her mind, she was saying, they're not doing something right. They keep pulling the door without moving the block. And then this notion of, do they all understand that they belong to a family, a community, and other groups? If that child doesn't go to a preschool or a school experience and they go to something like a playgroup, or if that child spends a lot of time in their community at their mosque or, synagogue or church, do they see it as, this sense of belonging, and even within their family? So I'm sure you're all thinking of a particular child, or you might even be thinking of your child or yourself as we move forward with this. So some things that are the byproducts of when children have strong, healthy foundations in socio-emotional development, they're all here on the screen. Persist at tasks, following directions, developing good relationships with peers, making friends. My eldest nephew, he was born with this. It's just a part of his constitution. Anywhere we went, he would leave, and at least 5 people would ask for his phone number or on a play date. He just has really high social skills. And his brother, who's 10 months behind him, was more like his uncle, myself, where we would go have fun, but I wasn't leaving with anyone knowing my name. But these are skills related to socio-emotional development that actually correlate to what adulthood and work in life. People who understand their own emotions and feelings actually thrive better because they can manage those strong emotions when they emerge. And this development of empathy. So empathy is the one feeling or emotion that actually starts on the outside and then it comes inside. Where others, we experience them on the inside, we might not recognize it, we might not have a name for it. And we're going to talk about that in the next session on brain development. But this empathy is the one that I need to see positive adults around me demonstrating. I need to see Ruby caring for the cat at home because it shows me how to care. I need to see Christine caring for the baby when the baby cries, picking the baby up, changing the baby's diaper, feeding the baby. I need to see Savita caring for the fish in this way. I need to see Ray saying, oh, you know what? This is a homeless person. They're hungry. They asked me to buy them a sandwich when we went in the store. I'm going to buy them. The care of something outside of myself is how it's modeled. And then I internalize it. Crucial, crucial, crucial. Which is why I had to my cousin, my young cousin, I have cousins who are my first cousins, but I'm old enough to be their father. And they have young children and they spend a lot of time with me. And I'm now, if we're together in the car, I'm forcing, Leah and Nick to have conversations with their 3 young children around when we see those things in society, to don't just drive past because your children are noticing it. We have to not just name it, but offer up things that what other human beings can do, this empathetic sense. When children don't have this modeled for them, and I hate to use this worst case scenario, but every time in this country, I'm just going to say in this country, when someone goes into a movie theater and they set it on fire, they walk into a grocery store and they shoot people, they walk into a school and they shoot people, each and every time, the one thing that they all have in common is the lack of empathy. This thing that wasn't modeled for them richly and that they didn't internalize, which is why empathy is so, so crucial to healthy social and emotional development. And I'm going to go back to the first point, and then we're going to move to the next slide. This notion of a sense of confidence and competence. So I have it written this way because these actually come right from the book, Neurons to Neighborhoods. You all remember that book about 20 years ago. It comes right from that. And if you don't have the book, you can go to National Academies Press and they'll give you the PDF for free. But so a lot of people who are in their 40s, their mid 40s, who were kind of children in the 80s, they were born in the 80s, their parents received a lot of information around this notion of your child needs to feel good about themselves. They need to feel good about themselves. Too much emphasis on me feeling confident and no emphasis on building competency in one area. Those children are stuck at home. They're stuck at home because this is balance of the two. And it should actually be written that competency precedes confidence. So we develop competency in an area even as a young child. And that helps us to gain the right kind of confidence. When we don't, if we're only building confidence and no competence, I'm not going to name that person, but they tend to have orange hair and orange skin. We show up in the world looking that way sometimes and acting that way sometimes. Competence, I've got to feel like I can do something. Zakari said, I can open this door the right way and close it the right way. That's how I build my confidence. But if my parents are telling me I'm just great and I'm special with their helicoptering and I don't build any competencies in any areas, it has a detrimental effect on my social emotional development. So how do we begin to teach these social emotional skills when healthy social emotional development is not present? Is not present. What do children do when they don't develop these skills? When they're in schools that say, catch a bubble, like those children at that top picture, the adults are telling them, catch a bubble. Catch a bubble is really this elementary school thing that I don't agree with, that got pushed down to preschool. They're basically telling children, don't talk, hold your breath. And I keep saying, you know what's going to happen? One of those children are going to hold their breath and they're going to pass out. And then when they pass out, we're going to have sweeping legislation saying it's illegal to tell a child to catch a bubble. And it's so sad that that would have to happen for us to stop acting in these ways, right? So when children do not have these skills, we often see what we call behaviors that challenge us, right? Because it's our job as their parents, as their teachers, as educators, people in their community to teach those skills the same way you would if I didn't recognize an S from an H in my name, or if I didn't know that one dot and the second dot make two dots. You would do some direct and discrete teaching to help me develop those skills. So the same thing has to happen with social and emotional development. So my question for you right now before we move forward is, how do we teach social emotional skills? How do we teach social emotional skills? Just put some stuff in the chat quickly, 30 seconds. How do you teach social emotional skills? And if you don't, if you find it hard, just say, I'm not sure, it's difficult. Ooh, second step, role modeling. Model it mostly, model it. All right, lots of modeling, lots of modeling. I love the modeling response because you know what? That's actually how we get culture. Culture isn't really taught, it's caught through interactions, through modeling. That's how most of us developed our culture around who we were, from watching our parents, our aunties, our uncles, our cousins, our great-grandparents, the people around us. We caught the culture of what was expected. So healthy social emotional development around what we need to teach, it's about guidance, not discipline. Think about that home, that community space, or even that classroom. It's about preparation, not management. Preparation, not management. In September, when those kids first started coming to the room, because there were so many 3-year-olds, after the first day, I ran to the puzzle area and took all the puzzles off the shelf and literally had to go find taller puzzles to put taller puzzles on the shelf, because almost half of my class were grabbing the puzzle pieces and just put them in their pocket. Yeah, The preparation was what off. It wasn't a match. Think about expectations and not rules. We have expectations for behavior, but not rules. We have expectations for Zoom. We keep ourselves muted. We put our cameras on, but they're not rules. We don't say we're going to send you out the Zoom room if you don't put your camera on, right? So they're about guiding young children to this place, guiding young children to this place. Here's my favorite slide. Some of you may have seen me use this slide before. I haven't used it in a few years. So when the California first created transitional kindergarten, I was charged with coaching a number of teachers in Oakland Unified School District. This is one of the places, specifically around them developing social-emotional teaching strategies as TK teachers. So I'll never forget one teacher on the Oakland-Berkeley border said to me, these children have to stand in line because they need to get ready for kindergarten. So in my head, I wanted to say, like in my head, I was thinking, what the hell? But of course, to her, I said, tell me more about that. Because what she said was standing in line equates to being successful in kindergarten. Now, I wanted to say that makes no sense at all to her. But of course, I didn't say that. It was the conversation I was having in my head. But when we believe that these children who are at the top, that they have to dress alike and that they have to stand in line and be quiet, is a line to school readiness, we're misguided around what social and emotional skills are. And the frightening part is those top pictures look too much like those bottom pictures for me, which is why I call them lines to readiness, lines to nowhere that's good. We've got to rethink this. So I showed this to a group of teachers who I was coaching in San Rafael, California years ago. And one of the teachers said, I'm gonna stop making my kids stand in line, which is why sometimes you have to just be quiet. Then I said, Elizabeth, tell me more about why they won't stand in line. She said, well, look at that slide. She misunderstood the intent. So standing in line is not evil. It's not negative, it's not bad. It's what happens when we're in line that changes it and can affect a child's social and emotional development. So then we talked about, well, what are the things you can do when your children are in line? She said, you know, my kids love to rhyme. I said, well, they can rhyme when they're in line if they're all have to walk down the hall because you're in the elementary school building and wash their hands in one bathroom. So it's a lot of waiting involved. So the line is what happens or doesn't happen that creates the inequity. And we were able to, you know, have a conversation through that. But thinking of social emotional skills, and that teacher who had a bachelor's degree, who was, you know, working in a large school district, had this firm belief. And I wonder where she got that from, that standing in line equated to success when they left her classroom. I just want y'all to think about that. Hold it as a question for reflection, a question for reflection. So now let's move quickly into the what to teach, when to teach, and how to teach. This is about identifying core socio-emotional goals for individual young children and groups of young children. And this is important. This is important if you work with groups of children in small groups or large groups, or even if it's just your two children at home and you notice, you know, one is lacking some skill development. So one of the children in my classroom, her mother was talking to me in the beginning of the school year about her older sister and how she, you know, kept her at home and she stopped working. They were living off just dad's income because she didn't feel like her daughter had enough socio-emotional skills to be successful in kindergarten. So she did what we call red shirting in the literature. She kept her daughter, and most times this happens with little boys, mainly little white boys. They do an extra year of preschool, so when they get to kindergarten, they're the oldest child there. So they've had a whole another 12 months, another year around the sun to develop social and emotional skills. So then Wyatt's not the problem. He's a little bit more regulated and he fits well into the system. And she did it with her daughter. So we were, you know, talking about this need of the individual goal for The older daughter, where the younger daughter is actually in my class currently. So let's look at what to teach. So this first part is we have to be real clear about what our goals is. What is our objective to support Shawn around his social and emotional skills? You talked about all those pieces that and experiences and activities that we want him to have, all those things that make up a healthy social emotional development. We have to consider, what is he doing? What are his capacities that he showed up with? And what is the area that I could do some direct teaching? We've got to figure that out. We can use resources. We can use things like the ASQ. You might use the social emotional screener. That's not the ASQ. You might use a behavior screener. You might use the DECA. You might use aspects of teaching strategies gold, whatever it is that you're using to get a better picture of who this individual child is when it comes to social and emotional skills. You might just Google a checklist. You might go to Help Me Grow at Alameda County and see what they have on social emotional skills and think about that child that you have in mind. So when we think about what to teach, we've got to think about, it's not just right now and it's not the future, but the right now of what is Shawn's strengths and how do we build on those instead of the traditional, this is what Shawn does, but I need Shawn to show up now as if it were May of next year. That's not what we mean by more complex skills over time. What we're talking about is the ability, I'm gonna use my classroom again because they're present on my mind. In the beginning of the year, my children could not sit on a rug beside each other without pushing and hitting and kicking each other. So I had to pull from my special education knowledge. When we came to Circle, they all had a chair. I printed out little name tags that had their picture and their name on it. They would all go to the chair, find their picture, sit on it, pick it up, and most of them put it in their mouths. This is real story, a real story. Today, guess what they can do? Come to Circle, sit on the rug. They understand what the periphery is, that is the edge of the rug. And we don't need the chairs or the name tags anymore. So it was this more complex skill that I thought they could achieve as it pertains to social emotional skills. They didn't have it, 2.5 months ago. So we had to practice and build. And then when I pulled it away, well, I should say we pulled the chairs away and the name tags, they showed that they had the capacity. A lot of it is experimentation with the intentionality. Going with that, this notion that all children learn at different rates, atypically developing children and typically developing children. So think of things like developmentally appropriate practice that considers chronological development, meaning I am this age because I was born at this time. However, developmentally, in certain areas, chronologically, I may be 4.5, but in some areas, developmentally, socially, emotionally, actually might be 2.8. What does that mean compared to the people sitting beside me at the small group who may be chronologically 4.5 like me, but developmentally 3.5, or even developmentally when it comes to social emotional skills, 5.5, a whole 12 months ahead of me? What does that mean around understanding that, individualizing, and showing back up with intention? It means figuring out the level of their skill development. Is it broad and specific? Is there skill development where Shawn needs skill development around how to be with peers? So when I was a mental health consultant like Christine years ago in Oakland and in San Francisco, I would always get, Mr. Shawn, Mr. Shawn, Mr. Shawn, Johnny won't share, Micah won't share, so-and-so won't share. So I would get kids and I would put them in like these little small groups. And the teachers loved it because I would pull the kids who they saw as problems away from them for 15 or 20 minutes and work with them. But one of the things I did around their skill level, so if Shawn showed up in my group and I knew that Shawn was not a turn taker, he was a snatcher, I'm going to sit Shawn with Janice because Jan is a turn taker and she doesn't snatch. Of course, so I'm learning from my peer, Janice. The kids don't know this. So I literally, this is literally one of the things that I would do. I would take a picture from a coloring book. Let's say it was a clown. And I have 4 colors, red, blue, yellow, green. I have 4 children sitting at the table with me. But I don't have 4 crayons for everybody on purpose. So there are 4 red crayons, and I say, I need all my friends to take the red crayon and color the clown's pants red. I know they can all do it. They're all doing it. Now, Shawn is seated directly in front of me. And I know he only has what? 3 crayons and not 4. Or he has 2 crayons and not 4. I did it intentionally. He doesn't even notice it yet because I had him pick up the red crayon. Then I say, I need all my friends to get a green crayon and color the clown's shoes green. Shawn looks. There's no green crayon. I look at him and nod. I don't say anything on purpose. The other kids beside him both have green crayons. Now, is he going to wait? Will they notice? These are all the things I need all these young children to start to learn around social emotional development. So one time I put him with a really high functioning social and emotional kind of awareness child. And she did something that I never thought would happen, because most children will say, when I finish, I can give you the crayon, which is one way to be intentional for them to talk to each other. I'm facilitating and trying to maintain this level of, I want them to negotiate with each other. One little girl looked and she said, oh, you don't have a crayon. She said, if I break mine, we can both color. It was the first time I was thinking, she just said, if I break the crayon, now we can both color. Breaking a crayon had never come into my adult mind as an option. I'm going to be really honest. What I always wanted them to do was to say, oh, you can wait, my adult mind, and then you can color after me. Or a child would pick up a different color crayon, and I would say, oh, you know what? We're going to color the buttons on the clown's shirt orange or whatever the other color was. So this is that level and skill type of pairing peers. You may have to pair young children with different people. Sometimes pairing with Mr. Shawn works. Sometimes pairing with Mr. Shawn won't work. They need one of the other 2 women in the room to pair with. It depends on the social setting. Am I home and I'm engaging with my siblings or my cousins in this way? Are we out in a social setting? Am I at preschool and I'm trying to engage in those same ways and it doesn't work because that kind of rough play gets articulated as violent play, depending on what it is. So we've got to understand the level and the type of skill, meaning what is it that I want to teach specifically, and how do I set up the context to teach that? This is all social emotional skill development. Probably my most favorite one is family values and cultural expectations. So back in August, I was down in Santa Clara County. I had spent the day with all of these home visitors, speech therapists, just a cadre of professionals who support young children with disabilities under 3, largely in their homes. You know, some of them come to the school, and the issue was the parents and families weren't doing what they said needed to happen. So they were frustrated as professionals. Like, if you do what I say, his hearing, he can't hear because culturally, this family believes that if my son wears a hearing aid around my community, they believe that we are the problem as the parents, that we're cursed, that they believe that I need to take my child to this other country and put them in this healing water to help. It's going to help. Yeah, what you're telling me to do around his language, we want God to intervene. So it was literally like this very, very interesting group who held some strong professional beliefs, but kept missing the values that families brought. And this wasn't around meeting people where they are. It was around this understanding of, how do we understand the both and of socio-emotional skills in the cultural context, right? How do we understand that what grandma might do that works, but if I did it, the whole context changes because I'm not grandma. About 25 years ago, I was center director in San Francisco, and this grandmother was raising her granddaughter. And she would do this thing with her that it was a both and. She would tell her goodbye and they would put their noses together. And then when she was frustrated with her, she would put her nose together and her voice tone would change. Now, to some people watching this, they may say, why is she in her face that way? You know, it's all over social media. But what I saw was, as it pertains to that family and what was valued, she was communicating with her granddaughter in a way that her granddaughter understood. But as the people at the school that she came to, we would never do that. We valued it in terms of you value it, so we accept it for you, but not for ourselves. This is important around social emotional skills. Another example, let me give you a more meaningful one that some of you may have be faced with. So years ago when I was in Atlanta and I had first gotten introduced to like the peace area in the classroom and what that meant. And I had a little peace table that none of my children used because all of their families said, if somebody hit you, hit them back. You know, we were in Atlanta, Georgia. It was the South. People believed in hitting and spanking. Grandmas wanted to spank the children in the school. It was very, very different. And it was highly, highly accepted that I was looked at as the weird person who was telling grandma, you can't spank him here. I know he wasn't listening, but you can't spank him here in the bathroom. Like what you do at home is what you do at home. And then everyone telling me I disrespected the grandmother, and I was completely confused as the center director. But this notion of someone hits you, hit them back, social emotional skills, you know, I had to realize that every time I told children we don't hit, I was losing because they were already told something different from someone else that they valued and loved. So I had to realize that my language had to change. Janet Gonzalez-Mena writes about this, where she talks about compartmentalization, that young children are experts at compartmentalizing. I wish I had known it then. I had got it years later, that what I had to start telling children was, I know your mom and your father and your uncle said if somebody hits you to hit them back, but they mean when you're home. At school, what do we do, Olivia? If someone makes us frustrated, what could we do? I'm not even going to ask the child I'm talking to. I'm asking a bystander, because there was a different set of rules in our Head Start program than there were at their home. So I had to stop saying don't hit, which is why I was losing. I had to validate what they were told, but help them juxtapose that with, oh, when I'm home on the block, I can hit people back. But when I'm at school, I can tell the teacher, we can use the solution kit, we can come to the peace table. There are other ways to solve problems with the hope of eventually that response will take over the other response. And at the time, I had no idea that I was teaching social emotional skills. I didn't see the connection. I did not see the connection. But there's a direct connection when we think of cultural expectations and values around social and emotional learning. In your classroom or in your program, you may have some ways that you transition children, parts of the routines, or even following expectations that are in direct contradiction to how that family will make a transition around dressing in the morning, how they prepare meals, how they share meals or don't share meals, and how they even travel to your preschool program or your early learning center. So we've got to figure out what they are so that when we're teaching, the teaching is targeted and is meaningful to the child and the family's lives. And I say that because I've done it multiple times. Is it easy? I don't think easy is the right word. I think it involves what? Not saying everyone fit into the same way. It involves me what? Getting to know families, asking curious questions, listening to children. It involves all of this background stuff so that when I make the intervention is correct. So I'm gonna use Zakari again, and I'm gonna move on to when to teach. So Zakari is being raised by her father, who's in his 20s, and she lives with her father's mother and grandfather. Her grandfather's a minister, they're religious. I know this because dad drops her off every day before he goes to work. And he doesn't go to work on Mondays and Tuesdays, so he drops her off and picks her up. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Miss Betty, her grandmother, picks her up. I have conversations with both of them. And that's when I realized that Zakari goes to church a lot. and she's like a 4-year-old little church usher, and that they were having church on Zoom, all of these things. So one day Zakari was having a really, really bad day, a really bad day. So I said, Zakari, come on, let's just go for a walk. She held my hand and we're just walking around inside the building, up and down the hallway. And then I stopped and I said, do you feel any better from walking? She said, no. And I said, well, what do you think might make you feel better? She said, my pop, her grandfather, she said, he picks me up and then he prays with me. So I was like, oh God. So he picks you up and he prays with you. But what Zakari didn't know was that Shawn comes from a religious family. I said, okay, because Zakari, let Mr. Shawn try to pick you up. Because she feels like she's like 10 pounds of bricks at only 4. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna have to sit down because Mr. Shawn's an old man. And I held her and I literally just started talking about things that I knew she was familiar with. Some people might say it was prayer. Some people might say it was meditation. And guess what? She calmed down. No, I did that because I have a relationship with her family. I told her father and her grandmother. Would I do that across all children? Heck no. Heck no. But because I had that background information and she told me what worked, I leaned in and I did it. She calmed down. What to teach. We've got to know who children are so that the intervention works. Mike says, whatever you remove must take something in its place. That's right. That's right. That's right. So when to teach? I'm going to speed up here because it's a quarter after the hour, and I want us to get to those last slides of how. We got to engage with children, meaning teaching them throughout the day, meaning in different settings. So think throughout the day, at home, at school, in the community. I'm being intentional about every day when we're walking to the bus stop or we're walking to the car, my 3-year-old has a tantrum. Why? What could I do differently to prevent my 3-year-old from having a tantrum? Or Buha, I'm going to tell the story. He knows I tell it. I haven't told it in years. So he's now 12, but he used to be slow to task. He was in Oakland Head Start, and I actually was the coach at his Head Start program, and I coached for like 4 months before I told him that that was my godson, because I knew they didn't know, because they were like, this little Asian looking boy who's actually biracial, but he looks Filipino like his mother and not Black like his dad. And because he was so quiet, no one knew. And then I ended up telling them that that was my godson. But he, in terms of teaching what to teach, would literally do things like wake up in the morning, scream on his bed saying, I got to go to the bathroom, when the bathroom was right beside his bedroom. So, you know, Goddad spent the night once, and he did that. I'm calling it nonsense. That's my judgment. With me, Jonathan and Tiffany had went out, and I was, you know, babysitting. So I get up the steps and I'm like, what's going on? He's literally jumping on his bed saying, I gotta pee, I gotta pee. So I grabbed his little hand and said, well, go in the bathroom and pee. And he was looking at me like, what? So I'm talking to him like, he does it every morning. And you all let him? The setting changed, but the other adult changed also in terms of engaging him. Same little boy. One morning when Shola was little, she beat him downstairs and she ate her oatmeal and his. That's what happens when you leave a toddler at the table. So he came downstairs and he had a fit. You know, he was like, oh, the food's gone, all the food's gone. So Tiffany's trying to appease him. And, you know, she's saying, you want me to make you something different? Because there was no more oatmeal. He's having a fit. So, you know, every morning after that for 2 months, he would scream and try to run downstairs without being dressed. They didn't engage the right way. I show up again, not that I have all the answers. And I figure out, oh, he's screaming like this because Tiffany says that was 2 months ago when she ate his oatmeal. Because he was like, Shola's going to eat my food. He's going to eat my food. Tiffany's like, that happened 2 months ago. But see how he held on to it for 2 months? That is a 4-year-old response. So I had to literally break all the steps down for him, that she wasn't going to eat his food. He had his own food and what needed to happen before he got downstairs. So I ended up creating this thing on his door where he could like say, I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna use the bathroom, I'm gonna brush my teeth, wash my face, get dressed. And every time he did something, he would like put the little sticker there and then go down the steps. It began to work. It began to work. So our question is, are there enough opportunities in the young children in your lives days to learn and practice social emotional skills? Or are we just directing them like traffic, telling them what to do and how to do it? Or are we thinking about what small group could they be in at home or at school? How are they engaging on the playground? How are they engaging with adults? Do they only go to peers at their own age, or do they appear to peers that are developmentally more superior or developmentally less than them in terms of the developmental skills around social and emotional learning, so that we know what to teach and how to engage? My favorite one here, climate. How do you establish the climate in your home, in your play group, if you work at the library, at your clinic, or in your classroom, or in your program as the leader? In your program as the leader. So a few things need to be understood around this notion of climate. A lot of people confuse climate with culture. They're not the same. Climate is, for young children specifically, that they're having multiple and very positive interactions throughout the day with adults, right? This notion of adult attention that's positive, not because you did something negative, but adult attention that's positive. Adult feedback around what I'm doing when I'm doing it. And this word that a lot of you used earlier around how are the adults modeling appropriate ways to what? Talk about emotions and feelings. How are adults helping children interact with other children on the playground? You know, are we creating opportunities for relay races, freeze tag, or even follow the leader, which all have a basis in social and emotional learning? So what to teach? So the one thing I'm giving you all, Leah, I don't think I put this in the handout pane. So I'm going to put it in the chat now, Leah, and share it with all of them, because I don't think I sent this to you in the email. I don't even think this slide is there. And Leah knows I'm real bad with this. They'll ask for the slide deck in advance, and literally 3 hours before the presentation, I'm making changes to the slide deck. So I know I'm guilty of that. And Leah's been working with me for years, so she doesn't yell at me. Here it is. I'm putting it in here now. So what I'm sharing with you is what we actually use at Yale. So we created this summer to go along with our reliability that we train therapists and coaches and consultants on. But I wanted you all to have it as an additional resource, because what it actually looks at, if I can get it to move to the other screen, is our research says that there are 9 areas that affect the climate in early learning settings with young children. So I'm giving you the reflection tool, even though you're not trained on the tool, but you can still use the reflection tool regardless. So if a lot of you are site leaders or you work with teachers, this isn't to replace your coaching or your consultation, but it can be additive, because these 9 dimensions our research found affect climate. So I just wanted to share it with you all, that you can share with your teachers, you could have a meeting with them. But when thinking of social and emotional skills, it's a way to lean in around those experiences that we have with young children. All right. So I'm not going to go over it all, but it just takes you through the 9 areas that our research say affects young children. Probably my favorite is adult cooperation. We have 2 tenets rather, or items we call them, that look at how adults work with each other and get along, and how young children pay attention to that if we're not getting along, it changes the climate of that experience. Or if we're co-parenting and we're not getting along, it has an effect on young children. So I know Leah received the handout, so she'll add it to the handout pane if someone was unable to. Sometimes folk are on their phone, so if you could not download it, she'll add it to the resource folder, and you can access it later when she sends the recording of it. Or if some people just go right to YouTube, and she'll have a link there that takes you to the folder to get all of those resources. And this notion of engaging activities, our question for reflection is, what ways do you or can you facilitate engaging experiences with children? This is important because one of the women that I work with, she loves doing like cooking and arts and craft things with children, and they look fun. But in my mind, I'm always thinking, what's the learning goal? And how engaging was it? Did they sit for 2 minutes? Were they able to sit for 5 minutes? Were they able to fulfill this process of what they were engaged in? But when we think of engaging activities for socio-emotional learning, not all children will engage in the same way. So our expectation can't be they're going to all do the same thing the same way. They can't all participate in the same similar ways. What we have to do is identify their preferences and their reinforcers, right? That sustain their interests. We have to figure out what is the structure that needs to happen to help children participate, to build this skill, regardless of him being atypically developing or typically developing. And you know, one thing that's really across school and home that can be an engaging activity, according to the research, it's meal times. So Head Start, I know, does family style meals where children have to share the same bowl and scoop it and pour it. This notion of asking and passing food using language and building the opportunities to engage with those around us. It seems so simplistic, but the research says children who actually do it at school and have meal times at home, actually socially and academically, they actually did better than children who did not participate in group time meals at school. So if they did a preschool program where children just eat, or they eat at different tables and they're eating whatever came from home, and they don't have to say, pass that, or I want some more milk, or I want some water. I have what I have and you have what you have. The exchanges didn't happen the same way compared to children who are at home and they're eating with their families, and I want another roll, and my brother has to pass the rolls, and then I have to move something on the table. And what happens around all of that, they found that it was actually deep and sustainable learning that benefited social and emotional skills. So again, it's these daily experiences that we have that can show up in our lives and in children's lives in these real ways, these very, very real ways. So then you may be saying, Shawn, okay, when not to teach? When not to teach? So we need to always be thinking and planning ahead. We need to have lots of time for responding to behaviors that challenge or conflicts, right? Because when we don't, we're being reactive, and we know that it's ineffective. We know that children need opportunities to practice these socio-emotional skills, okay? But then these things that we call problematic behaviors. So our question for reflection is, when do you find the most challenging times to teach a socio-emotional skill? You don't have to answer it out loud, but think that to yourself. When do you find it's most challenging to teach a socio-emotional skill? So one of the things that we talk about in the field is, don't teach at the peak, we teach down in the valley. So if you think of, regulated, getting dysregulated, going up a hill at the top of the mountain or the hill and then coming back down, what we want to do is, when the child is here, and we're going to call this regulated, is when we want to intervene. As the child starts ticking up, it becomes too late. Definitely when they're at the top, far too late. Now I have to wait for it to resolve itself and for them to come down. So the kind of rhymey way to remember that is we don't teach at the peak, we teach at the valley. Okay? Right. And that's because Helen says when the child is upset, or I'm upset too, we can't teach when we're dysregulated, as Jessica said. Nothing's coming in. We've got to wait until they connect to calm again, or I have to wait until I connect to calm. So we're going to end with how to teach in our final moments together. How to teach. So think about, what are the specific ways you teach, facilitate, and model social-emotional skills? What we actually know is how we as adults engage actually plays a tremendous role in social-emotional skills, which is why now when I'm showing up in places where I'm doing in-person visits and they'll say, we're a play-based preschool, and all the teachers are in the yard doing like this. And they're outside for an hour and a half, but the whole time the adults are doing like this. So I go in and I have a conversation with the director first. And I say, let's talk about neglect. Then they get nervous. And I say, not neglect in the way you're thinking, but let's talk about play and let's talk about neglect. And if we could have fun with the notion that in a play-based program, when adults aren't facilitating, it's a neglectful behavior. Then they all do like this. And then they start panicking. I say, no, let's not make this a panic, but how do we see this as we need to facilitate and teach differently, even in a play-based program, that the adults have a role and responsibility, not only at circle time, not only if I have a direct, discrete thing that I'm teaching in a small group, but as Peter Gay just said, throughout the day, that I'm thinking that way around how to teach, right? And how we engage. So not engaging actually diminishes a child's social and emotional learning. Literally, just yesterday. So little boy just started, yesterday was his second day. He literally started the half day before, what do you call it? Thanksgiving was his first day. And then he came back on Monday. So it was his second day. So I'm on the floor and Prince pulls out a puzzle, and then Asir comes over, and then Johnny comes over. So I'm really watching Johnny because I'm still trying to figure out how he engages. Johnny's on the spectrum. I've received one story, but Johnny has some capacities that I saw immediately that I want to lean into. So they mix two puzzles together. I'm trying to help them figure out what colors go together and which ones look like animals and which ones look like cars. Here's what happened. As long as I was engaged and I was on the floor with them, all three of them continued to do what I call productive struggle. And I kept asking questions like, how did you know those go together? How did you do that? Because I wanted Prince to articulate for Johnny what he did, because he kept finding them and putting them together. And Johnny was having a hard time putting his together. He was doing it, but he was having a harder time. And I wanted Prince to say his thinking behind it. Someone walked in the room and started asking me questions. So I'm on the floor and I kind of look up with that look that you can give someone like, not right now. And she continued to press me. And I said, hold on. And I stood up to, I want to say it was probably 60 seconds. When I turned back around, all three of them were gone. And when I tried to re-engage them, it went nowhere. Like the re-engagement was, come on back, fellas. We've got to clean this puzzle piece up. But I was so frustrated because as long as I was engaged, they were engaged. And socially and emotionally, right now, all three of them need me to be their anchor. I'm fully aware of that. But when other adults don't, they don't understand this is meaningful and needed and necessary right now to build their social emotional skills, right? And then lastly, this notion of engagement actually needs to show up differently depending on the setting or the activity. The way we engage inside isn't how we engage outside. The way we engage in our cafeteria isn't how we engage at a small group. The way I engage with them at home, for many of them, isn't how the adults in their lives at home engage with them. So let's look at this notion of engagement and what's foundational to engagement. So there are three basic assumptions that socio-emotional skills say adults need to have in terms of guiding and teaching. I'm going to move through this part quick because I want to get to how to teach children with delays or challenges. This notion of engaging throughout the day, as Peter Gay just said, I like to say this is sun up to sundown. How do we maximize each individual's child's motivation? We've got to connect with them individually in meaningful ways. I was trying to do that on the rug. All three of those boys required different amounts of positive attention and different forms of attention from me. So about 2 months ago, Prince was in the back of the room at the sand, and I was like in the front of the room. I think I was helping someone change the paper on the art easel. And this was, that learning hum that we talk about in Montessori was happening. All the children were doing what they needed to do. And he stopped. And he literally was like directly in front of me, but on the other side of the room. And he said, "Mr. Shawn." And I said, "Yeah, Prince." He said, "Do you love me?" And I was thinking, oh my goodness, like Prince has a mom and a dad, they both pick him up. But this positive attention. I said, "Prince, I love you very, very much." Guess what happened? The other 15, "You love me, you 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 love me." So I said, "Wait a minute, friends, Mr. Shawn," I named the other adults in the room. I said, "We love all of you very, very much. You never have to worry about that." And they kind of just went back, but it turned into this, well, if you told him you loved him, do you love me? Do you love me? And of course, I knew what was going to happen next. Parents were showing up saying, "My baby came home saying that how much they love you." And I had to explain to everybody, we had this like kind of classroom moment where this notion of love showed up, and that we are demonstrating that to your children in their most difficult moments. We're responding, not reacting. We're providing positive attention based on who they are, right? So this engagement throughout the day and maximizing motivation, for us, some of you may have heard, and there's discrepancies around like it's not real science, it's junk science, or that is not even science, but it's probably familiar to you all. So what's coming to me right now is this notion of love languages. This notion of people say, "Oh, we all have one." And I say, I think all 5 is mine. Because I want somebody to say, give me words of affirmation and say nice things in my ear. I want them to rub my feet and rub my shoulders, the back of my head, and like play with my big ears. My ears are really big. I want them to give me gifts. I like nice retro shirts. I like new socks. I like to smell good. I want quality time. I want you to go in the kitchen and cook me something and bring me a glass of Cabernet. Actually, just bring the whole damn bottle while I put my feet up on the table. And I want acts of service. I was telling Leah when we first got on that my neighbor, they are known for cutting my grass. And the first time they did it, I text the other neighbor, because we all talk about each other, but we all like each other. You know how it's good to be good neighbors, right? You say that the best neighbors are what? Protected by tall fences. So I called the other neighbor and said, "Oh my God, what did they say about me? They cut my grass." She said, she didn't tell me anything. And I said, "For real?" So then I texted her and was like, "Oh my God, how much do I owe him? Like, tell him I'll pay him for cutting the grass." And they were like, "You owe us nothing." They were like, "You're a fantastic neighbor. We just wanted to do it." And I was like, but my grass was like 2.5 weeks beyond being cut. So y'all were embarrassed because my property sits beside yours. And they were like, "No, it was just an act of service." And then the other neighbor called me and said, "They both just think you're the best neighbor ever. They talk about you all the time and how great they think you are." So this act of service, I had to convince myself and say, "Shawn, just receive it." There was nothing else intended. They were cutting their grass and said, "Let's just cut his at the same time." So where some people, in terms of engagement and that maximizing the motivation, to maximize my motivation, I need all 5. I don't need just one. I need all 5. I'm kind of greedy that way. So you got to figure out, how do you maximize the motivation of those individual children? And because so many people on here work with adults who work with children, how do you maximize those adults in terms of social and emotional skills? Because many of us are showing up socially and emotionally deficit based in terms of we just never learned and had opportunities to practice and hone to be an affirmed adult with strong social emotional skills. But it's never too late. It's never too late. I like to say, as long as you're breathing, there is opportunity. The second assumption is thinking about environments with young children. Think about flexible groupings. I know, and I like to go back to adults because so many people here work with adults who work with children. There are some adults that you group me with, I'm probably not going to open my mouth. And there are other adults that you group me with, I'm going to lose track of time, right? So what is the flexibility in grouping? Do the same children have to be together all the time? Or can they move and figure out with your help? And this flexibility in grouping can be about their needs. I gave you the example of sharing. I put children who shared with children who didn't share to build, because we all know they learn from them quicker than they'll learn from us. We can say the same thing the same way, and they'll do what another child says, but almost struggle to do what the adult is saying sometimes. Then this other part around the environment, meaning at home, in the community, or even at school, we want to look for patterns. Look for Shawn is only playing with Mike over and over again, but there are 15 other children in this space. Why is that happening? They seem to only play with the blocks and the dinosaurs. Why is that happening? Let me listen for the language that's happening. Is there language or is it all physical, right? Are they not using any verbal words, but they're just, doing physical kind of acts towards each other with the materials? That's that intentionality. In the third part, the context matters. The context matters. Is it adult directed or facilitated? Which is necessary. So we have this thing now where in early childhood, anything that's adult directed is seen as like bad. But if it's used to teach a specific skill, it might be needed and necessary, like adults leading small groups or adult-led games, right? But if it's child-directed or facilitated, we're thinking of the context for that social and emotional skill development. These things happen at center times when children are moving around the room, when they're picking their own activities, or times of the day when they're outside and they're participating in big outside games. We can target the specific social emotional skill that we need the adults to understand, learn, introduce, and teach. See that? Not the kids going to just get it through osmosis, but the adults have a huge role, the primary role in taking it deeper in terms of this specific learning that almost all of our children need today. All right, my final 6 slides, and then we're done for the day, Leah. Well, it's 7 more, the handout slide. So how do we teach children with delays or challenges, right? So we're talking about teaching young children to support each other in academic communication and social and emotional skills. So notice I said to support each other. The adult still has a role in this, but each one of these, you're going to see children, that peer-to-peer piece is happening here. So the first one is called Stay, Play, Talk, or SPT. Here, the adults teach socially competent children ways to talk and interact with their peers who have social and emotional delays. I'm just going to tell y'all this. This was new to me until about 5 months ago, but it has changed the game. I was I'm struggling right now because over the holiday, I used the word the universe, and one of my cousins who is a theologian jumped on me and said, you're using this word universe, and the place is just, why you don't say God, Shawn? Why won't you say God? So I literally got it wasn't abusive. We had a good time, but I was like, because I lived in California for 20 years and everybody started laughing. So it kind of worked in my behalf. But when I say the universe, God just shows up, because I believe something greater than me knew that I would need this in September. Yes, definitely, Peter Gay, the buddy system works. So peer buddies are taught, remember the more socially competent one, they're taught a few things. So let's look at what we actually teach these peer buddies. The first thing we teach them is to stay and attend to the play of less socially competent peers. And just like Peter Gay just put, that is the buddy system. We actually used, we got them from the Dollar Tree, those things that people with long hair put in their hair. So some are yellow, some are pink, some are green, some are blue. It's like a rainbow. And then we literally give it to them on their wrist, and they know that this is my buddy, and that one person is helping the other person. And we've pulled them aside and taught them something specifically around these three big important pieces to stay and play and talk. They're shown how to play with that. We call it targeted child, but we're not telling them that. To play with their peer, whose name we use, and engage them in the same toys. And it's really about us saying, you can help Shawn a lot. You know how to work this. Shawn is still learning. Miss Mary isn't the best teacher because you know it so well. So can you show me how you're going to show them? And we go through all of that with them, and it's actually working really, really well. And then this third piece is that they have to use their language, because usually these children don't have a lot of expressive language, right? Or they have very undeveloped social emotional skills, that they're talking with them and they're commenting on it in this ongoing and cyclical way. Stay, play, and talk. At first I gave stay, play, talk the side eye. I was like, okay, here they go with more of this. And anybody that knows me knows I'm going to try it out before it gives, on my list. And we are living this daily right now. Stay, play, and talk. And of course, it's evidence-based and it's research-based. If you Google it, a bunch of websites are going to pop up from special education places as an evidence-based approach. The next one is what we call incidental teaching. This is about, someone had put this earlier, this is about adults arranging the environments at home, in the community, or in school to ensure social interactions, so that we make sure that those social interactions actually happen, opposed to, oops, it happened on accident. Here, we're setting it up for it to happen. So I did this a little bit when I talked about the children in the chairs and putting their names in their pictures. What we had to do was place certain children beside other children. So there are children who, if I placed them beside each other, they were just going to kick each other with their feet the whole time and smile and laugh and not pay attention to anything else that was happening in that large group. So beside them were their more socially astute peer, who was more likely to say, pay attention or stop. We were doing it a little bit without realizing that we were doing it. So let's look at what this kind of incidental teaching is all about, according to arranging the environment. We start with observing children as they play. So if this were an observation training, the Montessorian in me would tell you, you might want to write this down, observation is your number one teaching strategy. Observation, can someone type it in the chat? Observation is your number one teaching strategy. Now, and everything you read would tell you that it's scaffolding is, higher order, and it is up there. But it's actually observation. If you observe well, you're going to know what to do and how to do it and when to do it, if you're really learning in the moment and on the moment, which is really reflection. So observation is your number one teaching strategy. Thank you, Olivia. Observation is your number one teaching strategy. If you can pay attention to children and learn about them in their play, you can become a fantastic teacher, in my opinion. And if this were Montessori training, I would tell you about the science behind what she says, observation, experimentation, and all those things, but I'm going to stay in this lane. So the second one is, as the adults, we've got to what? Make sure that we're observing well. Then we're going to prompt children and give them what we call effective feedback, not just any feedback, but effective feedback so that they can what? Want that feedback more, and it helps to facilitate ongoing positive interactions. Then you're going to pay attention to see, oh, you know what? Shawn might keep playing with the blocks and the dinosaurs. They must be of high interest in their preferred items. I wonder if I rotated those things in this play-based creative curriculum environment. The things that are new and novel to Mike and Shawn, will they gravitate towards those, play with them in a different way? Will I see more what? Language? And will it start to build other aspects of their social and emotional skills? Which is that fourth one. The goal is for them to use the toys, the materials, and equipment to promote cooperation and sharing. So at the school, that we have one of those rockers that's, the kid, what is this? A seesaw. I'm calling it a rocker. That children can go up and down on. And one little boy that doesn't have a lot of expressive language, he got on it, but he could not ask anybody to get on with him. So instead of me saying, Jessica, go get on the seesaw with so-and-so, I walked around and I said, wow, it looks like Tariq is on the seesaw by himself. It looks like he's looking for someone. I wonder if Tariq doesn't know everybody's name. So I'm walking by children and making them pay attention. And of course, what happened was one of the children walked over and I followed her, and she said, hey, Tariq, but I knew he wasn't going to respond. So I had to prompt him to say her name and give the language, and he kind of nodded his head. And that was the beginning of it, around kind of, wow, this equipment brought him together with another child on the seesaw. And they pretty much seesawed for, I want to say, another 30 minutes. So it starts that way. That person can become their peer partner or their play partner, specifically when one has high skills and one doesn't have the same amount of skills. We want them to learn and build from each other. And this third one, so the technical term for this is called correspondence training. But who wants to talk like that? Many of you may be familiar with this term, plan, do, review, as an aspect of the high scope curriculum, right? So let's talk about with this notion of helping children through plan, do, review. That's a little bit different than the plan, do, review in high scope. We're talking the technical term here of correspondence training, and what are we asking of children. So the first part is to talk to children about what they want to play with before they do it or start an activity. And then we check in with them over and over and over and over again, right? Well, this happens right behind that. Then we ask them to think about the child they're going to play with. And of course, we're always thinking of pairing children who don't have the same amount of social emotional skills with another child during the activity. So we get them to articulate it out loud. They know who they're going to play with, and they know what they're going to do. That's the other important part. What's your plan? When you play with Shawn, what are you going to do? Then when I'm finished, you have to come back around. This is where we come in as facilitators. Shawn, Larry, did you do what you said you were going to do? Did you build the sand tower? What was it like? Right? Sometimes when we have children with these social delays, we may actually need visuals to help them, or even a script. I do this often. I'll give children a little bit of language of what to say to other children, because I know they can do it, but they don't have all the language to engage them in that way at the moment. So plan, do, review, intentional teaching, and stay, play, talk are research-based, evidence-based ways that we know we can use to support children's social emotional skill development if they have challenges or delays. Wow. Final slide, Leah. So in your handout, there's a checklist. And this checklist comes from the folk at Teaching Pyramid. So they created this checklist with 13 ways that you can look at your practice around social emotional teaching practices as a reflection. In addition to what I shared, this is also in your in the handout link that Leah shared. So I encourage you to go through it and not say yes or no, but write down your evidence. And what I mean by evidence is don't write down your intention. So what I mean by intention is, so in California, we always tell people, teachers would have to like do their own inners and eckers on themselves and they would all score 7. And then when you come and you give them a 3 or a 5, they're ready to fight you. And I start telling everybody, the problem is we all judge ourselves by our intentions. But when Olivia comes, she's judging me on my actions, which is why they're off. So when you do this, actually look for evidence if you do it on yourself around, do I do these things with young children? And what's my evidence other than me putting a check, yes or no? That's how you help yourself reflect and grow. So as always, remember families are home, not at school. What we do at school and in our programs isn't necessarily how they're going to do it at home. And one of the things I like to remind is Dr. Lillian Katz. She described over 27 years ago 7 distinctions between a parent and a teacher. And I list one example there. But those distinctions, I want us to spotlight those. I haven't let go of this since the beginning of the pandemic, when all of us were telling families to do what we did in our early learning settings. And I'm like, wait a minute, families have a rhythm to their home, even if it's not the best rhythm, they have a rhythm. And we were telling them to create routines and schedules the way we do in our programs. And some of it actually caused more stress. So I just want us to remember that when we think of the people who are ultimately charged with caring and loving our youngest citizens, who are their parents and their families. So I just want to thank you all for your time and attention. First Five Alameda does this work based on feedback. What I mean by this, and I've been working with them for I think 15 years now about Leah, and they take the feedback seriously. The feedback is why the training department is funded. So without your feedback, more money gets pulled away from the training department and goes to other places. So when you get that link, she'll be sending it in the email later today. Please, 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 please complete it. Then they share it with me. And, they tell me where I'm doing well and where I, not doing too well. And then lastly, as a closing activity, thank you all for staying throughout the time. If we can just put in the chat a takeaway from this session around how you plan to integrate social and emotional strategies into your work with children. How do you plan to integrate social and emotional strategies into your work with children and families or teachers as a closing activity in these last 4 minutes? One takeaway from this session. Thank you all for the thank yous. One takeaway from this session. Janet says on a daily basis, all right? Communicate clearly with empathy and keep myself calm always. Whew. Christine said observing. Make more observations of the children and teachers to ensure children's needs are being met. Yeah. One of many takeaways from this session is using the strategy stay, play, talk. I love Rosemary said, you kept my attention and could not multitask. Well, Rosemary, they say that multitasking is actually not true. That if I have 3 competing commitments, I'm actually focusing on one and then trying to focus on the other. And oftentimes what they found was, if I'm focusing on one and then thinking about the other, none of them get done. But, I can only tell you what I read. I'm a Rick Hansen, just one thing. He says, jot, just one thing. Change my life. I focus on one thing a day, and that's all I'm getting done. If I do other things, cool. If I don't, I achieve my just one thing. It's going to help me live longer, Rosemary. Clear communication, being more observant. Observations of the classrooms, Khadija said. Intentionally planning for all students. That's right, Peter Gay. And implementing their plans based on their observational data, their assessments, what children are doing, and even stuff from their families. Know the children and their parents, Anne Marie. Yeah. Phyllis said, teaching the valley. There you go, Phyllis. I like it. I like it. Michelle said, better observations. We call them more effective observations. That's right. Mike said, emphasize the importance of observations. Keep calm and observe more, Bernadette says. Sophia said, don't teach at the peak, teach in the valley. Thank you, Savita. Rotate materials. Soila said, I'll just say co-regulation. Soila, tell Rainbow and Eva I said hello. Give them a kiss for me if you see them. I know y'all probably still working from home. Better, buildable relationships, leaving room to grow. Frednita, I love that. I love that one. I love that one. I love that one. Can I quote you on that, Frednita? Louisa said, share the observations, number one teaching strategy with the teacher said. Thank you, Fernita. All right, Fernita said I can, Leah. So don't be surprised if you show back up here next week and your quote is in my presentation, Fernita, because that's how I work. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. So thank you. All right, Leah. We got 1 minute. I'm going to stop share. Thank everybody for showing up and spending time on their Tuesday with us. I appreciate it. Hope to see you all at the brain development one so that we can activate your thinking stems again and move through this November, December series. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you all next week at the brain development one that we had to reschedule. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Shawn, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you. And thanks everyone else for joining us today. I'll be sending out the link to the evaluation in the afternoon, and I'll also be sending a link to the recording and resources after I have a chance to do a little light editing. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a great day.